The dust in the Cairo Museum storeroom was a particular kind of ancient, a fine, golden powder that smelled of sun-baked stone and forgotten things. Dr. Eris Thorne, a man whose passion for the past had etched as many lines on his face as years of fieldwork, brushed a careful hand over a wooden crate marked with faded hieroglyphs. It was a transfer from a decades-old dig in the Nile Delta, a site that had been hastily excavated before a dam project flooded it forever. The contents were mundane, mostly pottery shards and degraded tools, but one item on the manifest, listed with frustrating vagueness, had called to him, Item 734B, Skeletal Remains, Male, Mature. Unusual context. With a creak of protesting wood, he lifted the lid. Nestled in yellowed packing straw was a skeleton, not laid out in the respectful repose of a pharaoh, but curled on its side as if in sleep or perhaps in pain. The bones were a deep, stained ochre, speaking of great age. But it wasn't the position that caught Eris's breath in his throat. It was the left hand. The phalanges, the delicate finger bones, were curled not into a loose fist, but as if clutching something that was no longer there. And nestled between the metacarpals and the radius of the wrist was a small, dark object. Using tweezers with the reverence of a priest, Eris lifted it. It was a seal, carved from obsidian, and its surface bore a symbol that made his blood run cold. It was the Eye of Horus, but inverted, the teardrop falling upwards, a symbol he had never seen in any official record of Egyptian iconography. A forbidden symbol. This was no ordinary burial. This skeleton, over 5 millennia old, was a message. And Eris Thorne was perhaps the first person in 50 centuries prepared to listen. My name is Dr. Eris Thorne, and the story I am about to tell you was pieced together from fragments bone, stone, and clay. It is the story of the man I came to call Nebuchadnezzar, the Lord of the Spirit, and the secret he died to protect. To understand the profundity of his discovery, we must first journey back to the world he inhabited. A world teetering on the brink of immortality, it was the dawn of the Old Kingdom in Egypt. Around 3000 BCE, the land was newly unified under the first pharaohs, god-kings, who wielded absolute power. The air hummed with the energy of a nascent civilization. The primary religion centered on the sun god Ra and the god of the dead, Osiris. The concept of the afterlife was the very bedrock of society. It was a transactional relationship. Live a righteous life. Honor the gods, and your Ka, your spiritual double, would journey to the field of reeds, a perfect, eternal version of Egypt. But this journey was perilous, fraught with demons and tests, and it required meticulous preparation. This is why the pyramids were being conceived, not just as tombs, but as resurrection machines, designed to launch the pharaoh's soul into the cosmic cycle. But beneath this state-sanctioned orthodoxy, other currents flowed. In the shadows of the great temple complexes, in the smoky confines of scribes' quarters, and in the whispered conversations of the elite, there were rumors. Rumors of a different path to eternity, a path not granted by the pharaoh's priests, but seized by individual knowledge. They called it the path of the inverted eye. It was a heretical concept, suggesting that the soul's journey could be mastered not through ritual, but through a deep, almost scientific understanding of the human spirit itself. It proposed that every person possessed a divine spark, a fragment of the primordial chaos from which the gods themselves were born, and that by awakening this spark, one could bypass the judgment of Osiris entirely. The priesthood of Ra viewed this belief as a direct threat. If every man could become a god, what need had they for a god-king? The stability of the entire civilization, they argued, rested on the pharaoh's unique divinity. To speak of the inverted eye was treason, punishable by the complete erasure of one's name and memoria. Second death, far more terrifying than the first. This is the world Nebuchadnezzar walked into. He was not a pharaoh, nor a high priest. From the analysis of his bones and the few artifacts buried with him, I deduced he was a master scribe and an architect, a man deeply involved in the sacred geometry of the earliest pyramid projects. He was a man of logic, of lines and angles, of precise calculations. He would have been privy to the deepest mysteries of the state religion, and yet his inquisitive mind seems to have questioned them. One evening, I imagine him in his Spartan chamber, the flame of an oil lamp casting dancing shadows on papyrus scrolls. His superior, the high priest Hetep, a man whose authority was as solid and imposing as the stone blocks of the king's tomb, stood before him. Nebka-Hetep's voice was like grinding stone. Your work on the celestial alignments is unorthodox. You speak of angles that do not honor Ra, but some other nameless force. Nebka did not look up from his calculations. The stars do not care for our honors. High priest, they move on paths of their own making. I merely trace their truths. Truth, Hetep scoffed. There is only one truth, the truth of Pharaoh, the son of Ra. Your truths smell of the marketplace whispers, of the path of the forgotten. Do not walk that path, scribe. It leads only to oblivion. But Nebka was already on the path. His architectural work had led him to a stunning realization. The proportions of the royal tombs, the angles of the passages, they weren't just symbolic, they were functional. They were designed to resonate with specific energies, to amplify the potency of the spells and offerings within. He began to experiment in secret, applying these principles not to a king's tomb, but to the human body itself, which he saw as the ultimate, divinely proportioned temple. His skeleton was the key. The bone density, the subtle arthritic formations, they told a story of a man who had practiced specific, repetitive postures, not unlike early yoga or ritualistic kata. He was, I believe, mapping the flow of what he might have called life force or Heka within his own frame. The inverted eye of Horus Seal was his personal sigil, representing not a rejection of the gods, but an inversion of the traditional journey. Where Horus's eye was restored and offered to Osiris, the inverted eye looked inward, restoring the self to itself. The dramatic turning point in his life, and in my investigation, came when I discovered the true cause of his death. It was not old age. Advanced forensic analysis revealed microfractures in the ribs and a catastrophic trauma to the back of the skull, consistent with a fall from a significant height. But there was more. Trapped in the petrified cartilage of his larynx were minuscule fragments of linen and a residue of natron salt. The horrifying truth dawned on me. Nebka had been mummified alive. He had not been wrapped as a honored corpse. The linen was shoved into his mouth, a brutal act of silencing, and the natron, the drying salt used in mummification, was poured over him while his heart still beat. This was not a burial. It was an execution, a dark mockery of the very afterlife rituals he sought to transcend. His killers weren't just ending his life, they were attempting to annihilate his soul, to pervert his own search for immortality into a curse of eternal suffocation. Why? What had he discovered that warranted such a horrific end? The answer lay with the final and most breathtaking piece of the puzzle. Using a high-resolution micro-CT scanner, my team and I discovered that the interior of Nebka's bones, particularly the femur and humerus, were not hollow. They were inscribed. In a feat of unimaginable patience and skill, someone, likely Nebka himself, in a final desperate act, had used a diamond-tipped drill to carve a microscopic text into the medullary cavity of his own skeleton. It was his manifesto, his testament, the forbidden secret etched into the very framework of his being. The translation was a painstaking process, but the first few lines were enough to rewrite history. It began, "The gods do not grant eternity. They are but gatekeepers. The key lies within the vessel of flesh and bone. The breath is the boat, the spine, the ladder, the heart, the judge, and the advocate." I have seen the field of reeds, and it is here Nebka's secret was not a spell or a map. It was a physiological and philosophical revelation. He believed, and had seemingly demonstrated to himself, that the afterlife was not a geographical location to be reached, but a state of consciousness to be achieved. The elaborate Egyptian funerary rites, he claimed, were merely a externalized, simplified version of an internal process that any disciplined individual could perform. The weighing of the heart was not a literal event before Osiris, but a metaphor for the psychological confrontation with one's own conscience at the moment of death. By mastering his own body and mind, he sought to navigate this process consciously, to retain his awareness through the transition, thereby achieving true self-deification. This was the ultimate heresy. This was the knowledge the priesthood could not allow to spread. If the populace understood that the pharaoh's divine power was in fact an innate human potential, the entire political and religious structure would collapse. Nebka had to be silenced in the most symbolic way possible, his body turned into a prison for his soul, and his teachings hidden in the last place anyone would ever look. The mystery of who found him, who wrapped him in the linen and administered the natron salt, remains. Was it the high priest Hetep and his enforcers? Or was it a rival faction within the secret followers of the inverted eye? His body was buried not in a tomb, but in a simple pit near a workers' village, a final insult to a man who dared to reach for the stars. The secret died with him, lying dormant for 5,000 years, a silent rebellion encased in earth and time. The story of Nebka is more than a historical curiosity. It is a powerful conclusion about the nature of knowledge and power. It reveals that, at the very dawn of recorded history, alongside the rise of absolute authority, there existed a countercurrent of individual spiritual inquiry. The ancient Egyptian quest for immortality was not a monolithic, state-controlled program. It was a battleground of ideas. Nebka was a casualty of that first great war between orthodoxy and personal enlightenment. His skeleton is a testament to the terrifying price of forbidden knowledge and the indomitable human spirit that drives us to seek it, regardless of the cost. He was a heretic, a visionary, and a martyr, and his voice, silenced for millennia, now whispers a profound and dangerous truth from the dust of the ages.